I was 23 years old when I walked out of Riverside Reform School with nothing but a worn duffel bag, $72 in my pocket, and a heart so full of anger I thought it might burn straight through my chest. The iron gates clanged shut behind me. I didn't look back. Looking back meant remembering the 3 years I'd lost, the accusations that weren't true, the two so-called friends who'd set me up to take the fall for something I didn't do. They walked free while I paid the price. The justice system had chewed me up and spit me out, and now I was supposed to just rejoin society like nothing had happened. But everything had happened. My grandmother Eleanor had passed away while I was inside. She was the only family I had left. My father, her youngest son David Calloway, died when I was 6 months old. Car accident on a winter highway outside Seattle. Black ice sent their car spinning into a concrete barrier. My mother Sarah died with him. I don't remember them. I don't remember anything before Grandma Eleanor. Eleanor fought the state for 2 years to get custody of me. They said she was too old to raise an infant. She was 58, a widow running a failing farm in the middle of nowhere. But she didn't give up, and when I was 2 years old, she finally brought me home to Meadowbrook, Washington. She raised me on that farm for 13 years. Taught me everything about hard work and integrity. Showed me how to plant seeds and pull weeds and fix things that were broken. She was the only parent I'd ever known. Then I made some bad choices at 15. Got in with the wrong crowd in town, started skipping school, started drinking, started thinking I knew better than the woman who'd sacrificed everything for me. One night I was in a car with 2 girls I thought were my friends. They robbed a convenience store. I didn't know they were going to do it. I was in the car waiting, thinking we were just getting snacks. But when the police came, those girls said it was my idea, said I'd planned it, said I'd threatened them. The public defender told me to take a plea deal. 3 years in juvenile detention, then Riverside until I turned 23. I refused, went to trial, lost. I'd written Grandma letters from inside, told her I was innocent, begged her to believe me. She wrote back 3 times each letter saying she loved me. She believed me. She was fighting for me. Then the letters stopped coming. The facility said she'd stopped writing. I thought she'd given up on me. Thought she'd finally realized I was nothing but trouble. 8 months ago, I got the notification that Eleanor Calloway had passed away, cancer, fast and brutal. I requested compassionate leave to attend her funeral. Denied. Flight risk, they said. So my grandmother, the woman who'd fought for 2 years to get me, who'd raised me despite everything, who'd loved me when no one else did, died alone, and I couldn't even say goodbye. The county sold her house to pay off medical debts. Everything she'd owned was liquidated, scattered, gone. I had nothing. No home, no job prospects with a record, no references, no family. Just $72 and a burning desire to prove that I wasn't what they'd made me out to be. I spent my first night of freedom in a homeless shelter in Seattle, staring at the cracked ceiling and listening to the sounds of dozens of other broken people trying to sleep. The shelter smelled like disinfectant and despair. The mattress was thin, the blanket threadbare. Around me, women coughed and snored and whispered to themselves in the darkness. Nobody asked questions, nobody made eye contact for too long. We were all ghosts here, trying not to be seen. In the morning, I took a cold shower in a bathroom with flickering lights and graffiti carved into the metal stalls. I looked at myself in the cloudy mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. 3 years had changed me. My face was harder, thinner. There were shadows under my eyes that hadn't been there before, and something in my gaze that looked like it had seen too much, too young. I was 23, but I felt ancient. The next morning, I went to the public library and spent hours on a computer searching for any opportunity that might give me a fresh start. Every job application asked the same question. Have you ever been convicted of a crime? Every time I checked that box, I knew my resume would go straight into the trash. I was about to give up when I saw it. An online auction for a small farm in rural Washington, about 200 miles north of Seattle. The starting bid was $100. $100. The photo showed an old farmhouse that looked like it might collapse in a strong wind, a sagging barn, overgrown fields, rusted farm equipment slowly being reclaimed by nature. The description was brutally honest. Property sold as is, significant repairs needed, no utilities currently connected, buyer responsible for all back taxes and fees. It was perfect. It was exactly what someone like me could afford, and more importantly, it was far enough away from Seattle that I could disappear. Start fresh, where nobody knew my name or my story. I read the listing 3 times, my heart hammering. Meadowbrook, Washington. Population 632. A place so small it probably didn't even have a stoplight. A place where maybe, just maybe, I could become someone new. I watched that auction like a hawk for 3 days, camping out at the library from open to close. The librarian started to recognize me, this thin girl who sat at the same computer for 8 hours straight, refreshing the same page over and over. On the final day, with just 10 minutes left, the bid was still at $100. Nobody wanted this place. It was too remote, too run down, too much work, but I saw a possibility. I saw a chance. When the countdown hit 1 minute, I entered my bid, $100. My finger hovered over the confirm button, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. This was it. This was everything I had. If I did this, I'd have nothing left, no safety net, no backup plan. I'd be all in on a property I'd never seen in person, in a town I'd never visited, betting my entire future on a pile of rotting wood and forgotten dreams. I clicked confirm. The 60 seconds that followed were the longest of my life. The page refreshed. Congratulations, you are the winning bidder. I'd done it. I owned a farm. Well, I would own it once I figured out how to pay the back taxes, which according to the fine print totaled another $850. I had $72. I was already in over my head, and I hadn't even seen the place yet. But I'd learned something in those 3 years inside. I'd learned that when you have nothing to lose, you're capable of things you never thought possible. The next 3 weeks were a blur of desperation and hustle. I took every odd job I could find. Construction day labor for cash, showing up at 6 a.m. outside the Home Depot where contractors picked up workers. Unloading trucks at the docks at night, lifting boxes that made my back scream. Cleaning office buildings before dawn, scrubbing toilets and emptying trash cans while everyone else was still asleep. I slept in the shelter, ate at soup kitchens, saved every single penny. Other women at the shelter thought I was crazy. Girl, you're buying a farm, you don't know nothing about farming. They were right. I didn't. But I knew about surviving. I knew about refusing to quit, and I figured that was at least a start. 3 weeks later, I had $940. It had cost me blisters on every finger, exhaustion that went bone deep, and more sweat than I thought one human body could produce, but I had it. I paid the back taxes at the county office, signed a mountain of paperwork I barely understood, and received the deed to my new property. 47 acres in a place called Meadowbrook, Washington. The clerk looked at me with something between pity and confusion. You know that property's been abandoned for almost 12 years, right? Old Eleanor Calloway died and nobody wanted it. It's been sitting empty ever since. The name hit me like a punch to the stomach. Eleanor Calloway, my grandmother's name. I stared at the clerk, my vision swimming. The fluorescent lights suddenly too bright, the room suddenly too small. What did you say? Eleanor Calloway, the clerk repeated, checking her records. Died about 8 months ago in hospice care. The property went to the state when no heirs came forward within the statutory period. That's why it ended up in auction. But I'm her granddaughter, I whispered. The clerk looked up sharply, her expression shifting from bureaucratic boredom to something like horror. You're Eleanor's granddaughter? Yes, Iris Calloway. She raised me. The woman set down her pen carefully as if it might break. Oh, honey. Oh, no. Did you not know? Did nobody tell you? Tell me what? That this was your inheritance. Eleanor left a will, very specific. The farm and all assets were to go to Iris Calloway, her granddaughter, but when the county tried to notify you of the bequest, I was in Riverside, I said quietly. Reform school. The clerk nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. The letters came back. Every single one. Marked inmate moved address unknown. After 6 months of unsuccessful attempts to locate you, the property was declared abandoned and scheduled for public auction. I stood there, gripping the edge of the counter to keep from falling. So my grandmother had left me the farm, had tried to reach me, had wanted me to have it, and I'd never known because I was locked away, being shuffled between facilities, lost in a system that didn't care enough to make sure her letters found me. I walked out of that office in a daze, the deed clutched in my hand like a lifeline. My grandmother hadn't forgotten me. She'd left me everything she had, and I'd almost lost it forever, buying back my own inheritance like a stranger. I hitchhiked north, getting rides from truckers who shared their coffee and sandwiches and asked few questions. They could tell I didn't want to talk, and most of them respected that. When I finally arrived in Meadowbrook, it was early evening. The tiny downtown consisted of one stoplight, a general store, a diner, and a gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1975. I asked the woman at the gas station for directions to the old Callaway place. She gave me a long, measuring look before pointing down a winding country road. "About 5 miles that way. Can't miss it. It's the only place that looks like it's been through a war." I walked those 5 miles as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple so beautiful they almost made me forget how terrified I was. What if this was a massive mistake? What if the place was even worse than the photo suggested? What if I'd just thrown away every penny I had on a fantasy that could never become reality? But I kept walking because turning back wasn't an option. It never had been. When I finally saw the property, my heart sank. The photos hadn't lied, but they'd been kind. The farmhouse was worse in person. Half the porch had rotted through, creating gaping holes that looked like missing teeth. Windows were broken or missing entirely. What looked like a family of raccoons had made a home in the upstairs bedroom based on the chattering sounds coming from inside. The barn was leaning at an angle that seemed to defy physics, held up by nothing but stubbornness and decades-old timber. The fields were a jungle, weeds as tall as my waist, blackberry bushes with thorns like claws. Small trees had taken root in what had once been cultivated land. Scattered throughout the property like the bones of some ancient civilization were pieces of farm equipment so rusted and overgrown I could barely identify what they'd once been. I dropped my duffel bag on what remained of the front porch and sat down hard, suddenly feeling the weight of every decision that had led me to this moment. I was alone, broke, on a property that would take years to restore, with no electricity, no running water, and winter coming in a few months. For the first time since walking out of Riverside, I felt tears burning in my eyes. What was I doing? Who did I think I was? I wasn't a farmer. I wasn't a carpenter. I was just a girl who'd gotten screwed by life and was too stubborn to admit defeat. Grandma would have known what to do. She always knew what to do, but Grandma was gone and I was on my own. I let myself feel sorry for myself for exactly 10 minutes, watching the last of the daylight fade from the sky. Then I wiped my eyes, stood up, and decided that tomorrow I'd start figuring this out. Tonight I'd find a place to sleep that didn't have raccoons in it. I ended up in the barn, which was surprisingly more intact on the inside than it looked from outside. The structure was sound enough in places, and there was an old stall that looked relatively clean. I cleared a space, spread out my sleeping bag, and fell asleep to the sound of mice scurrying in the walls and the wind whistling through gaps in the boards. The next morning I woke with the sunrise. The barn was filled with golden light dust motes dancing in the air like tiny For a moment before reality crashed back in, it was almost beautiful. Then I remembered where I was and why. I began the overwhelming task of taking inventory of what I'd actually bought. The house would need months of work before it was habitable. The barn was structurally unsound in at least 3 places I could see immediately. The well in the front yard might still work, but I'd need to test it. And then there was all that equipment scattered around the property. I spent the entire day walking the land, making mental notes, trying to prioritize what needed to be done first. It was during this survey that I really looked at the old tractor for the first time. It was parked behind the barn, so completely overgrown with vines and brush that I'd almost missed it entirely. A John Deere, probably from the 1960s based on the style. Green paint faded to a pale ghost of itself, tires flat and cracked, but somehow still possessing a kind of dignity despite its abandonment. I'd never driven a tractor in my life, never worked on engines beyond changing oil in a car. But something about it called to me. Maybe because it looked like I felt forgotten and left to rot, but still standing, still there. I decided to clear the brush away from it, partly because I needed to do something productive and partly because I was curious if there was any chance it could ever run again. I worked all afternoon pulling away blackberry vines that had grown through the wheel wells, cutting back saplings that had sprouted around it, sweeping away years of accumulated leaves and debris. My hands were covered in scratches and dirt, my back ached, but there was something satisfying about seeing the tractor emerge from its prison of vegetation. As the sun started to set on my second day as a landowner, I'd finally cleared enough to really see what I was working with. That's when I noticed something odd. The tractor's seat was slightly askew, like it had been moved and not quite put back right. I climbed up onto the tractor, my boots crunching on the rusty metal, and tried to adjust the seat back into position. It wouldn't budge at first, rusted in place after all these years. But I kept working at it, jiggling and pulling until finally something gave way. The seat lifted up, and I realized it wasn't just a seat but a storage compartment. Something I'd never known tractors had. Inside that compartment, wrapped in what had once been oilcloth but was now mostly disintegrated fabric, was a metal box. My hands were shaking as I lifted it out. The box was about the size of a large shoebox made of tin that had rusted around the edges but was still intact. It had weight to it, something substantial inside. There was no lock, just a simple latch that had rusted shut. I carried it carefully into the barn, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. What were the odds? What were the actual odds that I'd find something hidden in a tractor on a property nobody had wanted that I'd bought for $100 because I had no other options? I used a screwdriver from my duffel bag to work the latch free, prying carefully so I wouldn't damage whatever was inside. When it finally popped open, I had to sit down. Inside the box were bundles of cash, old bills wrapped in rubber bands that disintegrated at my touch. Beneath the money were papers, documents, photographs, and beneath all of that was a leather journal, its pages yellowed with age but still readable. My mind was racing. How much money was this? Who had hidden it? Why, I counted the money 3 times because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. $8,400. To me, sitting in a barn with $28 left to my name, it was everything. It was materials to fix the house, tools to work the land, food to eat while I figured out how to make this place productive. It was hope in physical form, but it wasn't mine. It belonged to someone, had been hidden by someone for some reason. I opened the journal with trembling hands and began to read by the fading light. The handwriting was shaky but legible, and the first entry was dated April 15, 1998. My name is Eleanor Calloway, and if you're reading this, I'm probably dead. I hope whoever finds this has better luck than I did. The words swam in my vision. Eleanor Calloway. My grandmother. This was my grandmother's handwriting. Her words, her secrets. I read through the night, learning the story of the woman who'd raised me. Eleanor Calloway had been a farmer her whole life, had inherited this land from her father who'd inherited it from his. She'd raised 5 children here with her husband, James. David was the youngest, born in 1978, her baby. The journal told me things I'd never known. My grandfather, James, hadn't died of natural causes. He'd been murdered. In 2001, the same year my father died, though James's death came 3 months earlier. James had been a surveyor before he took over the farm. He'd done geological work for mining companies. And in 1998, he'd discovered something beneath the land around Meadowbrook. rare earth minerals, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. A man named Malcolm Thorne had come to James offering to buy the property. James had refused. Malcolm had threatened him. 3 days later, James Calloway drove off a cliff on Miller's Bluff. The police said he was drunk, even though James had never touched alcohol in his life. Eleanor never believed it was an accident, but she couldn't prove anything. 6 months after James died, my father David and mother Sarah were killed in their car accident. Eleanor fought for 2 years to get custody of me, their infant daughter. The journal entries about those years were heartbreaking. They say I'm too old, that I can't care for a baby. But Iris is all I have left of David, all I have left of my baby boy. I'll fight them. I'll fight until I win. And she had won. Brought me home when I was 2. The entries continued documenting my childhood, my first words, my first steps, how proud she was when I learned to read, how worried she was when I started getting into trouble as a teenager. Then came the entries about my arrest, my trial, my conviction. She'd hired lawyers, spent money she didn't have, sold parcels of land to pay for my defense, and when I was sent away, she'd started writing letters. March 3rd, 2019. Letter number 1 to Iris. Told her I believe in her, that I'm fighting for her, that she'll come home soon. The entries continued week after week. Letter number 17 came back today. Inmate moved, address unknown. Letter number 52. Still returned. But I won't stop trying. Letter number 100, 5 months of writing. None of them reached her, but I can't give up. On and on they went, documenting 5 years of unanswered letters. Letter number 200, letter number 250. And then the final entry, dated March 9th, 2024, 3 days before she died. This is letter number 263. 5 years I've been writing to Iris. 5 years they've all come back. Inmate moved, address unknown. But I know she's out there somewhere. I know my granddaughter is alive. I'm getting sicker. The cancer is winning. The doctors say weeks, maybe days. I wanted to see her one more time, to tell her I never stopped believing in her, to tell her I'm sorry I couldn't save her. This farm is all I have left to give. I'm leaving it to her in my will, if she ever comes back, if she ever finds this place. I hope she knows how much I loved her. Every single day, every single letter. I never gave up on you, Iris. Please don't give up on yourself. I sat in that barn surrounded by 263 letters I'd never received, all addressed to me in different facilities, all stamped with those same words. Inmate moved, address unknown. She'd written me every single week for 5 years, and I'd never received a single one. I'd thought she'd forgotten about me, thought she'd given up. But she'd been fighting for me the entire time, selling her land piece by piece to hire lawyers, writing letters that never reached me, waiting for me to come home. And she'd died 8 months ago, never knowing if I'd received her final message. I cried then, really cried. Not the quiet tears of self-pity, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook my entire body. For my grandmother who'd loved me when I thought no one did. For the 5 years of letters I'd never read. For the inheritance she'd left me, not just in land and money, but in faith. When I finally stopped crying, I gathered all 263 letters and began to read them. Each one started the same way. My dearest Iris, and each one ended the same way. I love you. I'm waiting for you. Come home. It took me all night to read them all. By the time I finished, the sun was rising again, painting the barn in gold and amber light. I understood now what I had to do. The money wasn't just money. The farm wasn't just a farm. They were my grandmother's legacy, her final gift, her way of telling me that I was worth fighting for. And I would honor that by finding her other children. My aunts and uncles I'd never met, the 4 siblings who'd left and never come back. Because I'd read the truth in her journals. She hadn't chosen the farm over them. She'd kept it for me, so I'd have a home to come back to. But first I heard the sound of a car engine, a Mercedes, black and expensive, pulling up the long driveway. A man stepped out, tall, maybe 62, wearing a suit that probably cost more than everything I owned. He looked at the farmhouse, at the barn, at me standing there covered in dirt and tears, and he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "I'm looking for the owner of this property," he said. "That's me," I replied. His smile widened. "Is it? Well then, we need to talk. My name is Malcolm Thorne." Malcolm Thorne stood there in his expensive suit looking at me like I was a problem he needed to solve efficiently and without mercy. Behind him, two men in equally expensive suits emerged from the Mercedes. Lawyers, probably. The kind who charged $500 an hour to make people's lives miserable and slept just fine at night. I crossed my arms over my chest, very aware of how I must look. Covered in dirt, wearing clothes I'd slept in for 2 nights. Standing in front of a farmhouse that was falling apart. But I was done letting people make me feel small. What kind of mistake, I asked, keeping my voice level. Malcolm pulled out a folder from his briefcase with practiced ease. "This property has certain legal complications, mineral rights disputes, easement issues, environmental concerns that were never properly disclosed. Very technical matters that Eleanor Calloway never properly resolved before her unfortunate passing." I watched him carefully. Every instinct I'd developed in 3 years of surviving Riverside was screaming that this man was lying through his perfectly white teeth. "The property was sold at a legal auction," I said. "I paid the back taxes in full. I have the deed." "Yes, well," Malcolm said smoothly, adjusting his cufflinks, "that auction may have been premature. These legal issues I mentioned could tie this property up in court for years. Very expensive litigation for someone in your situation." He let that word hang in the air like a threat. Situation. Meaning poor, meaning fresh out of prison, meaning vulnerable, meaning someone he could intimidate. However, he continued, pulling out another document. "I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer to avoid all that unpleasantness. $50,000 for the property, cash. You could walk away today, start fresh somewhere else. No legal troubles, no headaches, $50,000. A week ago, that would have sounded like all the money in the world. But I'd spent the night reading my grandmother's journals. I knew what this land meant to her, what it represented, what it had cost her, and I knew with absolute certainty that Malcolm Thorne was lying about everything. "No," I said simply. Malcolm's smile didn't waver, but something changed in his eyes, something cold and calculating. "I understand this is a big decision, Miss Calloway. Why don't you take 48 hours to think it over? Consider your options carefully. I don't need 48 hours. This farm was my grandmother's. She left it to me. I'm not selling." Malcolm snapped his briefcase shut with a sharp click that sounded like a door closing. "That's unfortunate, very unfortunate, because if you refuse my generous offer, I'll be forced to pursue legal action. And trust me, Miss Calloway, you don't want to go up against my legal team. We have resources you can't even imagine." He handed me a business card, his fingers cold when they brushed against mine. 48 hours. Think very carefully about your future." Then he and his lawyers got back into the Mercedes and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the morning air like a warning. My hands were shaking as I looked down at the card. Malcolm Thorne, CEO, Thorncorp Pharmaceuticals. I stood there for a long time watching the dust settle before I walked back into the barn and pulled out my grandmother's journal. I flipped through the pages until I found what I was looking for. An entry from March 10th, 2001, 23 years ago. "James is dead. The police say it was an accident, that he was drinking and drove off Miller's Bluff. But James didn't drink. Not a drop. Not ever. And he was the most careful driver I've ever known. Something's wrong. I know something's wrong in my bones. That man came to the house 3 days ago. Malcolm Thorne from Thorncorp wanted to buy the property. James told him no, told him we'd never sell, that this land had been in the Calloway family for 3 generations and would stay that way. Malcolm smiled, said James might want to reconsider, said accidents happen to stubborn people. That was 3 days ago. Now James is dead. I can't prove anything. The sheriff says I'm a grieving widow seeing conspiracies where there's only tragedy, but I know. God help me, I know what happened. My blood ran cold as I read those words. Malcolm Thorne had been here before, 23 years ago, 3 days before my grandfather died, and now he was here again, making the same offers, issuing the same threats. I needed answers, and I needed help. I grabbed my jacket and walked the 5 miles back into town, my mind racing the entire way. Meadowbrook in full daylight was even smaller than I'd realized. The main street consisted of maybe 10 buildings total. The diner I'd passed, a general store, a post office, a hardware store, a church with a white steeple, a tiny library, and right in the middle a small restaurant with a faded sign that read Meadowbrook Diner. Est, 1952. I pushed open the door and a bell chimed overhead. The diner was classic small-town America, red vinyl booths worn smooth by decades of use, a long counter with chrome stools, the smell of coffee and bacon grease and apple pie, an old jukebox in the corner playing Patsy Cline. There were maybe 6 people inside, and every single one of them turned to look at me when I walked in. I was used to that look, the ex-con stare, the way people looked at you when they could somehow sense you'd been inside. But these looks were different, curious, assessing, not hostile but cautious, wondering. A woman behind the counter, maybe 65, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, smiled at me warmly. "Take a seat anywhere, honey. I'll be right with you." Her voice was kind, genuine. I slid into a booth by the window and waited, watching the quiet street outside. The woman came over a minute later with a pot of coffee and a menu, studying me with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Coffee, please," I said. She poured, and I wrapped my hands around the warm cup like it could anchor me to reality. "You're new in town," she said. It wasn't a question. "Just arrived a couple days ago, passing through." "No," I said, meeting her eyes. "I'm staying. I bought the old Calloway place." The coffee pot stopped mid-pour. The woman went very still, her eyes widening. Carefully, slowly, she set the pot down on the table and slid into the booth across from me without asking permission, which should have been strange but somehow wasn't. "You're Eleanor's granddaughter," she said quietly. It wasn't a question this time either. I nodded, my throat suddenly tight. "I'm Iris." The woman reached across the table and took my hand in both of hers. Her grip was warm and strong. "I'm Rowena Pike. I own this place. And honey, I knew your grandmother for 40 years. Tears pricked at my eyes. "You knew her." Rowena's eyes were shining too. "She was my best friend. We went to high school together, stood up in each other's weddings, raised our kids together. And she talked about you all the time, Iris. Showed everyone pictures, told us all about how smart you were, how proud she was of you." She squeezed my hand tighter. "Even after what happened, especially after what happened. Eleanor never believed those charges against you. Not for 1 second. She spent every penny she had trying to get you out, hired lawyers, private investigators, fought the system every way she knew how." "I didn't know," I whispered. "I thought she'd given up on me." "Never," Rowena said fiercely. "When the letters started coming back from the prison, she drove to every facility in the state trying to find you. They kept saying you'd been transferred, but they couldn't or wouldn't tell her where. It was like you'd disappeared into the system. The system failed you both, child, failed you terribly." I told Rowena about Malcolm Thorne, about his offer, about his threats. Rowena's face went pale, then flushed with anger. "Malcolm Thorne came to see you this morning. Do you know him?" Rowena stood up abruptly, walked to the front door and locked it with shaking hands. Then she flipped the sign to closed. The other customers in the diner didn't protest. They just gathered around my booth, faces serious, like they'd been waiting for this conversation for years. "We need to tell you some things," Rowena said, sliding back into the booth. "Things about this town, about your grandfather James, about why Eleanor could never let that farm go no matter how hard it got." She poured coffee for everyone who'd gathered her hands, still trembling slightly. "Your grandfather James was a good man," she began. "One of the best I've ever known. He was smart, careful, methodical. Before he took over the farm, he worked as a surveyor. Did geological surveys for mining companies, oil companies, that sort of thing." I nodded, not understanding where this was going yet. About 25 years ago, this would have been 1998 or so. James did a comprehensive geological survey of all the land around Meadowbrook. Private project, just curiosity mostly. He liked understanding the land he farmed. Rowena pulled out her phone and showed me a map she'd obviously looked at many times before. He found something. Deposits of rare earth minerals, the kind used in electronics, batteries, medical equipment. Worth millions, maybe hundreds of millions. My mouth went dry. "On my grandmother's farm." "On your grandmother's farm," Rowena confirmed, "and on 17 other properties in the area." She zoomed in on the map, showing me properties marked in red scattered around Meadowbrook like drops of blood. All these properties, all sitting on a fortune that nobody knew about except James. "What happened to the other owners?" "Oh," Rowena's expression darkened. She pulled out a worn folder from behind the counter like she'd been keeping it ready for this exact moment. Inside were newspaper clippings, obituaries, police reports yellowed with age. She laid them out on the table one by one like evidence in a trial. Frank Morrison, died in a car accident 2003, refused to sell his land to Thorncorp 6 months earlier. Sarah and Michael Bennett, house fire 2005, had just turned down Malcolm Thorne's offer. David Chen, hunting accident 2007. Thorncorp had been pressuring him for months. Thomas Whitfield, farm equipment accident 2008. On and on it went. 17 families, 17 deaths ruled as accidents. All of them within 6 to 12 months of refusing to sell to Malcolm Thorne. All of them owning land that sat on top of those mineral deposits. "My grandfather," I said quietly, the pieces falling into place like a nightmare puzzle. Rowena nodded, her eyes filled with old grief. March 14th, 2001. James Calloway, single car accident, drove off Miller's Bluff in broad daylight on a clear, sunny day. Police said he was drunk, even though every person in this town could tell you that James Calloway never touched alcohol in his entire life. Not once. And Eleanor knew. Eleanor suspected, Rowena corrected, but she couldn't prove anything. Malcolm Thorne had connections. The sheriff back then, a man named Sterling, was in Thorne's pocket. So was the mayor. Half the county commissioners were on Thorncorp's payroll one way or another, so she kept the farm. She kept the farm. Rowena said, her voice breaking slightly, because selling it would mean admitting they'd won. Would mean your grandfather died for nothing. And because she believed someday someone would be able to stop Malcolm Thorne. Would be able to get justice. An older man who'd been listening spoke up. "I'm Henry Morrison. Frank was my brother." A woman with red-rimmed eyes added, "I'm Patricia Bennett. Sarah and Michael were my parents." One by one they identified themselves, family members of the 17 victims, people who'd lived with this knowledge for years, unable to prove anything, watching Malcolm Thorne get richer and more powerful while their loved ones moldered in graves. "I need to see them," I said. "The graves," Rowena stood. "I'll drive you." The Meadowbrook Cemetery was small, maybe 2 acres on a hill overlooking the valley. White headstones scattered among oak trees. Peaceful, quiet, deceptively serene. Rowena led me to a section in the back, and I wasn't prepared for what I saw. 17 graves, all clustered together like a memorial garden. All died between 1998 and 2010. Different causes listed on the stones: car accident, house fire, hunting accident, farming accident, heart attack, stroke. But all of them had refused to sell to Malcolm Thorne. and in the center of them all a simple granite headstone. James Michael Calloway, beloved husband and father, 1970-2001, gone too soon. I knelt in front of my grandfather's grave, this man I'd never known, and placed my hand on the cold stone. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm sorry I didn't know you. I'm sorry no one ever got justice for what happened to you. But I'm here now, and I'm going to make this right, I promise you. I swear to you, I'm going to make this right." Rowena helped me stand her arm around my shoulders. "There's someone you need to meet," she said quietly. We drove out of town into the rolling farmland beyond. After about 20 minutes, we pulled up to a well-maintained ranch house with a red barn and neatly tended fields. A man was working near the barn, maybe late 60s, wearing overalls and a flannel shirt. He moved with the easy competence of someone who'd worked the land his whole life. "Silas," Rowena called out. The man turned and his face lit up when he saw Rowena. Then his gaze shifted to me and he froze completely. "Good Lord," he said quietly, staring at me like he'd seen a ghost. "Eleanor." "I'm Iris," I said gently. "Eleanor's granddaughter." Silas Whitmore pulled off his work gloves and walked over slowly, studying my face. "You look just like her," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Same eyes, same determination in your jaw. Lord, it's like seeing her at 23 again." He shook my hand, his grip strong and calloused from decades of farm work. "I'm Silas Whitmore. Your grandmother and I farmed side by side for 40 years. She was my best friend, and she talked about you every single day, Iris." He led us into his house where we sat at a kitchen table scarred and worn from years of use, but clean and welcoming. "Eleanor tried to tell people about Malcolm Thorne," Silas said, pouring coffee. "Tried to warn them, but nobody would listen. He had too much power. Too many people owed him favors or feared him." "What about the police?" Silas laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sheriff Sterling. He's been on Thorne's payroll for 20 years. Won't retire, won't leave. Just sits in that office protecting Thorne Corp's interests. So there's no one who can help." "I didn't say that," Silas said, leaning forward. "There's a detective, state police, woman named Harper Voss. She's been investigating Thorne for 2 decades. Can't get anything to stick because witnesses die or disappear or suddenly change their stories. But she knows, she believes, and she's never given up." "Can you contact her?" Silas pulled out his phone. "Better than that. She gave me her number years ago, told me to call if anything new ever came up, if anyone was willing to talk, willing to fight." The phone call was brief. Silas explained who I was, what had happened. I could hear a woman's voice on the other end, sharp and interested. When he hung up, Silas nodded. "She'll be here tomorrow morning, wants to meet you, wants to see if we can finally build a case against Thorne." Just then the back door opened and a younger man walked in. Late 20s, tall, dark-haired, wearing work clothes and boots. "Dad, I got the tractor running again." He stopped when he saw me, his eyes widening slightly. "Deckard," Silas said, "this is Iris Calloway, Eleanor's granddaughter. Iris, this is my son, Deckard." Deckard stared at me for a long moment, and I saw recognition and something else in his eyes. Sadness, maybe, or memory. "You look just like her," he said softly, echoing his father, "like Eleanor did in the old photographs." Silas explained, "Deckard's been helping maintain your grandmother's property for the past year. After Eleanor died, it didn't feel right to just let everything fall apart, so he's been going over there, keeping the barn from collapsing completely, making sure the well didn't go bad, that sort of thing." "You've been taking care of the farm?" I asked, surprised. Deckard shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the attention. "Somebody had to. Your grandmother was family to us, even if not by blood. Felt wrong to let her life's work just rot away." "Thank you," I said, and meant it. Deckard nodded. "Come on. I'll show you what needs the most work so you know what you're dealing with." We drove back to my property in his truck, and he walked me through everything with patient detail. The barn's structural problems, 3 support beams that needed replacing. The well pump that was on its last legs but could probably be fixed. The electrical work that would need to be done before winter if I wanted to actually live in the house. It was overwhelming, but Deckard was patient, explaining everything in terms I could understand, never making me feel stupid for not knowing. Your grandmother kept detailed records, he said, showing me notebooks she'd left in a kitchen drawer. Everything about this farm. What worked, what didn't, when to plant, when to harvest. It's all here if you want to learn. I do, I said firmly. I want to make this place what it was, what she wanted it to be. Deckard looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Then I'll help you. For Eleanor. That evening after Deckard left, I went back to the barn and my grandmother's journal. I needed to understand more, needed to find what my grandfather had discovered, what had gotten him killed. I searched the barn thoroughly, looking for anything James might have left behind. Then the house, despite the raccoons and the rotting floors, nothing. It was Deckard coming back the next morning with tools and lumber who found it. We were working on the basement trying to fix a water leak that was making the foundation worse, when Deckard stopped and tapped on the concrete wall. This section sounds hollow, he said, frowning. We looked at each other, understanding dawning. It took us 2 hours to carefully chip away at the concrete. Behind it was a space maybe 4 feet square hidden in the foundation. And inside that space was a metal filing cabinet sealed against moisture. My hands were shaking as I pulled open the drawers. Inside were files, dozens of them. Geological surveys, water quality tests, medical records, photographs, photos of dead fish floating in streams, of children with strange rashes and mysterious illnesses, of livestock dying in fields for no apparent reason. All dated between 1998 and 2001, all from properties near the Thorncorp facility on the eastern edge of the county. James Calloway had been building a case, documenting everything, the contamination, the illnesses, the pattern of deaths. And at the bottom of the last drawer, wrapped in plastic, was a tape recorder. Old-fashioned, the kind with actual cassette tapes. I pressed play with trembling fingers. My grandfather's voice filled the basement, and I heard him for the first time. March 11th, 2001. This is James Calloway of Meadowbrook, Washington. I'm recording this as insurance, as evidence, as a last resort if something happens to me. Malcolm Thorne called me today, 3rd time this week, said he wanted to make one final offer for the property. I told him the same thing I've told him for 3 years. No, we're not selling. He didn't like that answer, said I should reconsider, that it would be dangerous to keep refusing, dangerous for me, dangerous for Eleanor. I asked him what he meant by dangerous. He laughed, said accidents happen all the time in the country. People drive off roads, houses catch fire, terrible tragedies that nobody can prevent. I told him I knew what Thorncorp was doing, that I had proof they were poisoning the groundwater, dumping toxic waste from their rare earth mineral extraction operation, that 17 families had already gotten sick and some had died. I told him I was going to the FBI, that I had documentation of everything. He stopped laughing then. His voice went cold. He said I was making a very serious mistake, that I should think about my family, about Eleanor, about our kids, about what could happen to people who don't know when to keep quiet. I told him to get off my property. That was 2 days ago. Tomorrow I'm driving to Seattle. I have a meeting with an FBI agent named Catherine Morrison at 10 a.m. I'm bringing all my evidence, every document, every photograph, every water test, everything. If you're listening to this recording and I'm not around to explain it myself, it means Malcolm Thorne made good on his threat. It means he killed me to protect his company and his profits. Don't let him get away with it. Don't let him keep poisoning people, keep killing people for money. My name is James Michael Calloway, and this is my testimony. The tape ended with a click. I sat there in the basement holding evidence that my grandfather had been murdered, that Malcolm Thorne had killed him and 17 other people to protect his illegal dumping operation. And nobody had ever been able to prove it. Until now. Deckard was staring at the filing cabinet, his face pale. We need to call Detective Voss. Right now. I nodded, but first I had something else I needed to do. I needed to find my family. The 4 children Eleanor had written about in her journal, because they needed to know the truth about their father, about their mother, about why Eleanor had kept this farm at the cost of her relationship with them. I spent the next few hours at Rowena's diner using her computer to track them down through social media, public records, phone directories. Grace Sinclair was easiest to find. She was a CEO of a consulting firm in Chicago. Her company had a website with contact information. I called from Rowena's office phone, my heart pounding. Sinclair Consulting. How may I direct your call, Grace? Sinclair, please. Tell her it's about Eleanor Calloway. There was a pause. 1 moment, please. A minute later, a woman's voice came on the line. Professional, efficient, slightly impatient. This is Grace Sinclair. Who is this? My name is Iris Calloway, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm Eleanor's granddaughter. The silence on the other end was profound. Then very quietly, I didn't know Mother had a granddaughter. I'm David's daughter. Your youngest brother. My parents died when I was an infant. Eleanor raised me. I see, Grace said, her voice carefully neutral. What can I do for you, Iris? Your mother died 8 months ago. I just found out. She left me the farm in Meadowbrook. Another pause. I'm aware the farm was sold at auction. I bought it, not knowing it was my inheritance. I took a breath, and I found something else, something I think you and your siblings should know about. What did you find? 263 letters. I said, my voice breaking slightly. Your mother wrote them to me over 5 years, every single week, all of them trying to reach me. All of them came back marked inmate, moved, address unknown. She never gave up trying to find me. I heard Grace's breath catch, heard what might have been a suppressed sob. And there's more, I continued. I found evidence about your father's death, about what really happened to him. I think you all need to know the truth. Grace was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. When as soon as possible. I gave her the address. There are things happening here, things I need help with, and I think your mother would want you to know everything. I can be there in 3 days, Grace said. I'll contact Bennett, Vivian, and Donovan. We'll all come. She hung up without saying goodbye. I made similar calls to the others, though I had to track them down through more indirect means. Bennett Calloway in California working construction. Vivian Foster in New York, a fashion designer. Donovan Calloway in Texas managing a sporting goods store. Each conversation was different, but they all agreed to come. 3 days. 3 days and I'd meet the family I never knew I had. But first I had to survive Malcolm Thorne's deadline. The 48 hours ended at sunset the next day. I was in the barn when I heard the Mercedes pull up again. Malcolm Thorne stepped out along with his lawyers, but this time there were 2 more men with them. Big, muscular, not lawyers, security maybe, or enforcers. Miss Calloway. Malcolm called out pleasantly. Have you reconsidered my offer? I walked out to meet him, very aware that I was alone and that the nearest neighbor was Silas a mile away. I'm not selling, I said clearly. Malcolm sighed dramatically. That's very disappointing. I'd hoped you'd be reasonable. He nodded to one of the lawyers who pulled out a thick document. This is a lawsuit, Malcolm said, claiming that the auction of this property was invalid due to pending litigation over mineral rights and environmental issues. It will tie up the land for years. You won't be able to sell it. You won't be able to develop it. And you'll be personally responsible for all legal fees, which I estimate will run well into 6 figures. He smiled that cold smile. File it. I'm still not selling, I said. Malcolm's pleasant mask slipped. You're making a very serious mistake, Miss Calloway. A mistake you'll regret. Is that a threat? It's advice, he said coldly, from someone who knows how the world works. Young women who don't listen to advice tend to have accidents, tend to disappear. Nobody asks many questions about people like you. Ex-convicts, no family, no connections, just another tragedy in a world full of tragedies. I looked him straight in the eye. My grandfather had connections. He was about to turn you into the FBI, so you killed him. Malcolm went very still, his eyes narrowing dangerously. That's a very serious accusation. It's the truth, and I have proof. I was bluffing, but Malcolm didn't know that. Or rather, I had proof, but I wasn't sure yet if it would be enough. His face darkened with anger. You have nothing. I have everything my grandfather collected over 3 years. Water samples, medical records, geological surveys, and I have his recording. The one where you threatened him, where you admitted what Thorncorp was doing. Malcolm took a step toward me, and his security did the same. Careful, Miss Calloway. You're playing a very dangerous game. So are you, I said, standing my ground even though my heart was racing. And I'm taking all of it to the same FBI agent my grandfather was meeting with the day you murdered him. Malcolm's jaw clenched. You have 1 week. 1 week to accept my offer or withdraw these ridiculous accusations. After that, I won't be responsible for what happens. He got back in his Mercedes and drove away, tires spitting gravel. My hands were shaking, but I'd done it. I'd stood my ground. That night I sat in the barn and read the last entry in my grandmother's journal by flashlight, March 9th, 2024. My dearest Iris. This is letter number 263. 5 years I've been writing. 5 years and they've all come back undelivered, but I'm not giving up. I can't give up. I'm getting sicker. The cancer has spread to my bones now. The pain is terrible, but worse is the thought that I might die without ever seeing you again. Without ever telling you the truth. Your grandfather didn't die in an accident. He was murdered by Malcolm Thorne because he was going to expose Thorncorp's illegal operations. James died protecting this land. Protecting the truth. Protecting the people of this town. I kept the farm not because I loved it more than my children. I kept it because it was evidence. Because selling it would mean James died for nothing. Would mean all those other 17 families died for nothing. If you're reading this, if you found this journal, it means you came home. It means my prayers were answered even though I'm not here to see it. Don't let Malcolm Thorne take this land, Iris. It's not about the money, it's about justice for your grandfather, for the 17 families, for everyone Thorne has destroyed. I love you, my darling girl. I searched for you every day, wrote you every week, never stopped believing you'd come back. I'm sorry I couldn't be there when you finally did, but you're not alone. This town remembers, this town knows, and when you're ready, they'll help you fight. Be strong, be brave, finish what your grandfather started. I believe in you. I always have. Your loving grandmother, Eleanor. I closed the journal, tears streaming down my face. 3 days until my family arrived. 3 days to prepare to bring down Malcolm Thorne. For my grandfather. For the 17 families. For my grandmother who never gave up. For justice. Detective Harper Voss arrived the next morning in an unmarked sedan, and she was exactly what I'd imagined from Silas's description. 52 years old, iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Eyes that had seen too much but still burned with fierce determination. She wore a plain suit and carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who'd spent decades fighting battles most people never knew about. She sat at Rowena's kitchen table. Rowena had closed the diner again and invited the families of the 17 victims and went through every document in James's filing cabinet with meticulous care. Every photograph, every water quality test, every medical record, every geological survey. It took her 3 hours. When she finally looked up, her expression was grim but electric with possibility. This is everything I've needed for 20 years, she said quietly. But we have a problem. Of course we do, I said. The evidence is old, 23 years old for most of it. Any competent defense lawyer will argue chain of custody issues. Will say these documents could have been fabricated, tampered with, planted. So it's useless. Harper shook her head firmly. Not useless, just not enough on its own. We need something current, Something that proves Thorne is still operating the same way, still willing to threaten and harm people to protect his interests. She looked at me carefully. You said Thorne threatened you directly, yes. 2 days ago. And did he admit anything? Anything at all about your grandfather? He didn't deny it. When I accused him of murder, he didn't deny it. He just said I couldn't prove it, but he didn't confirm it either. Harper said, drumming her fingers on the table. We need him to talk, to admit what he did, on record, with witnesses or recording that can't be challenged in court. The realization hit me like cold water. You want me to wear a wire? Harper's expression was serious. It's dangerous. If he suspects anything, if his security does a sweep, if he decides to get physical instead of verbal. She let the sentence hang. I understand the risks. You're 23 years old. You just got out of prison. You could walk away from all of this, take Thorne's money, and start over somewhere else. I met her eyes steadily. My grandmother didn't walk away. My grandfather didn't walk away. 17 families paid with their lives because nobody would stand up to him. I'm not walking away either. Harper studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Then we do this carefully. We do this right. And we make absolutely sure you're protected every second. She pulled out a small case from her bag. Inside was a recording device, state-of-the-art, smaller than I'd imagined. You'll invite him back. Tell him you're ready to negotiate, that you've been thinking about his offer. Get him talking about the past, about your grandfather, about the other families. He's arrogant. I've studied him for 20 years. He thinks he's untouchable. Use that. What if he brings his security? What if they search me? I'll have a tactical team positioned around the property, Harper said. Anything goes wrong, anything at all, we move in immediately. You'll also have a panic phrase, something natural you can say that will trigger immediate intervention. We spent the rest of the day planning, rehearsing, going over every possible scenario. By the time Harper left, my nerves were stretched thin as wire. That evening, Deckard found me sitting on the porch staring out at the fields. You don't have to do this, he said quietly, sitting beside me. Yes, I do. Why? Why risk everything? Because my grandmother spent 5 years searching for me. I said, my voice steady. Writing letters I never received, keeping this farm so I'd have a home to come back to. Because my grandfather was murdered for trying to do the right thing. Because 17 families deserve justice. I turned to look at him, and because I'm tired of being afraid, tired of letting powerful people get away with destroying lives. I was in prison for 3 years for something I didn't do. Malcolm Thorne has gotten away with murder for 23 years. It's time that changed. Deckard was quiet for a moment. My father told me about your grandmother, about how she never gave up looking for you, about the letters. 263 letters, I said softly, every week for 5 years, all returned, and she kept writing anyway. That's love, Deckard said. Real love. We sat in silence as the sun set. I'll be there tomorrow, he said, when your family arrives. If you need anything, thank you. The next morning I woke to the sound of cars pulling up the long driveway. They'd come, all 4 of them. Grace Sinclair stepped out of a rental sedan first, and I recognized her immediately from the photos in Eleanor's journal. Tall, elegant silver gray hair and a perfect bob. She wore a business suit even here, but her eyes were red-rimmed like she'd been crying on the drive. A second car pulled up and a man got out, Bennett Calloway. 55, broad-shouldered, with calloused hands and a weathered face that spoke of years working outdoors. He wore jeans and a work shirt and moved with the solid confidence of someone who built things with his hands. The third car brought Vivian Foster, and she looked so much like Eleanor in the old photos it took my breath away. Delicate features, gray-blue eyes. She wore all black, artistic and flowing, and carried a worn sketchbook under one arm. The last to arrive was Donovan Calloway, pulling up in a truck rather than a rental car. The youngest at 49. He had Eleanor's eyes and James's stubborn jaw. He got out slowly, looking around at the farm with an expression I couldn't quite read. I stood on the porch, suddenly terrified. These were my family, my blood, and they were strangers. Grace walked up the steps first. She stopped at the top and looked at me for a long moment. "You look like her," she said quietly, her voice breaking. "Like Mother when she was young. I've heard that a lot the past few days." Grace's composure cracked completely. She pulled me into a fierce hug and I felt her body shaking with sobs. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry we didn't know about you. That we weren't there." "It's not your fault," I said, my own tears coming. One by one, the others came forward. Bennett with his awkward but sincere handshake that turned into a brief, tight hug. Vivienne, who wrapped her arms around me and cried openly, not even trying to hide it. Donovan, who stood back for a moment watching before finally nodding and saying simply, "You kept the farm. Mother would be glad." I brought them inside. The house was still mostly unfurnished, but Rowena and Silas had helped me set up a table and chairs. I'd made coffee, and I'd arranged Eleanor's 263 letters in neat stacks on the table. Grace saw them first. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Are those—" "Every letter she wrote to me over 5 years," I said. "All returned, all marked inmate moved address unknown." Bennett picked up one of the letters with shaking hands. He opened it, read a few lines, and had to sit down abruptly. Vivienne was crying again, gathering letters in her arms like precious things. Donovan stood apart, but I saw his jaw working, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I thought Grace began, then stopped. Started again, her voice barely a whisper. "We thought Mother chose this farm over us. After Father died, she wouldn't sell. We were so angry. We thought she cared more about the land than about her own children. She kept it for me," I said quietly. "Read the journal. She explains everything." I handed Grace my grandmother's journal. For the next 2 hours they read, passed the journal between them, read the letters, went through the newspaper clippings about the 17 deaths, the geological surveys, the evidence James had collected. By the time they finished, all 4 of them were crying. "She was trying to protect us," Bennett said, his voice rough. "If she'd sold the land, if she'd let Thorne win, he might have come after us too. Might have decided we knew too much." "And she was waiting for you," Vivienne added, looking at me. "Keeping the farm so you'd have a home when you got out." "Oh God, we left her alone. We left her here alone for years, and she never stopped fighting for you." Grace stood and walked to the window, composing herself with visible effort. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I told them about Detective Harper Voss, about the plan to get Malcolm Thorne to confess, about the wire I'd be wearing tomorrow. "Absolutely not," Grace said immediately. "You're not putting yourself in danger like that. Someone has to," I said. "Not you. You're 23 years old. You just got out of prison. This isn't your fight." "Yes, it is," I said firmly. "Grandma made it my fight when she spent 5 years looking for me, when she kept this farm knowing what it would cost her, when she wrote 263 letters believing that someday I'd read them." I stood up, facing all 4 of them. My grandfather died collecting evidence against Malcolm Thorne. My grandmother died waiting for justice. 17 families lost people they loved, and Thorne is still out there, still threatening people, still getting away with murder. I looked at each of them in turn. "I'm doing this, with or without your help." Donovan spoke for the first time since arriving. "Then you'll have our help." Grace started to protest, but Donovan cut her off. "She's right, Grace. This is our fight too. Our father was murdered. Our mother spent the last years of her life alone because we were too angry and too proud to come back. We owe it to them. We owe it to Iris." "What can we do?" Bennett asked. I smiled. "Actually, I could use some help fixing this place up. The barn's about to collapse. The house needs work before winter, and if I'm going to keep this farm, I need to make it livable." Bennett's face lit up. "I can do that. I've got 2 weeks before I need to be back in California. We can shore up the barn, fix the porch, get the basics sorted." Vivienne pulled out her phone. My husband Marcus is an electrician. He's driving up tomorrow. We can get power restored properly. I'll stay, Donovan said quietly. I quit my job in Texas before I came. If you'll have me, I'd like to help you work this land. The way Dad and Mother did together. The way they did together, I echoed, feeling something warm unfold in my chest. Grace was the last to speak. She pulled out her business card and wrote something on the back. "This is my personal cell," she said, handing it to me. "And I'm making some calls today. I have resources, legal resources, financial resources. Malcolm Thorne isn't going to intimidate my niece, not while I'm breathing." That evening we had dinner together at Rowena's diner. The whole town turned out to meet Eleanor's children who'd been gone for so long. Silas and Deckard joined us. Detective Harper came by to finalize plans for tomorrow. And slowly I started to understand what family meant. Not just blood, but people who showed up, who stayed, who fought alongside you. The next morning, Harper fitted me with the wire. It was incredibly small, tucked into the collar of my shirt, practically invisible. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Good," Harper said. "Fear will keep you sharp. But remember, I'll be listening to every word. My team is positioned around the property." You say the panic phrase, "I wish I'd taken that coffee and we're there in 30 seconds. I nodded, my mouth dry. I'd called Malcolm Thorne the night before, told him I was ready to discuss his offer, that I'd been thinking about what he said. He'd agreed to meet me at 10 a.m. at the farm. At exactly 10, the black Mercedes pulled up. Malcolm Thorne stepped out alone this time. No lawyers, no security. That should have been my first warning, but I was too nervous to process it. "Miss Calloway," he said pleasantly, "I'm glad you've decided to be reasonable." "I'm ready to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I have questions first, questions about my grandfather, about what really happened to him." Malcolm's smile didn't waver. "Your grandfather died in a tragic accident, as I've already explained. He was going to the FBI. He had evidence that Thorne Corp was poisoning the water supply, killing people to cover up illegal mineral extraction." Malcolm took a step closer. "That's a very serious allegation, Miss Calloway." "It's the truth. I have his files, his recordings, everything he collected over 3 years." "Then you understand why this property is so important to me," Malcolm said, his tone shifting slightly. "Because it sits on millions of dollars in rare earth deposits. Deposits you've been illegally extracting for 23 years while dumping toxic waste into the groundwater. You're very well informed. Your grandfather was thorough, I'll give him that." "So you admit it? You admit Thorne Corp was breaking the law?" Malcolm laughed. "I admit nothing that could be used in court. But between you and me, your grandfather was in over his head. He thought he could fight me, thought he could stop what I'd built." "What did you build? A graveyard?" 17 people dead, all because they wouldn't sell you their land. 17 tragic accidents over the course of many years," Malcolm said smoothly. "No connection whatsoever that anyone could prove. Except you. You're the connection. You threatened each of them. You threatened my grandfather, and when they wouldn't back down, they died. Your grandfather made his choice. He chose to be stubborn, chose to threaten me with the FBI instead of taking my generous offer. So you killed him." "I never said that. You just did. You said he threatened you with the FBI. You said he made his choice. You're admitting you killed him." Malcolm's expression finally changed, his pleasant mask dropping away to reveal something cold and calculating underneath. "You can't prove any of that in court. This conversation never happened. My lawyers will tear apart any recording you might have made." I pulled back my collar slightly, showing him the wire. "You just confessed to everything. Detective Harper Voss and her team heard every word." Malcolm's face went white, then purple with rage. "You little..." He lunged at me, hands reaching for my throat. I'd been expecting it, stepped back. But he was faster than he looked. His hand closed around my arm, jerking me forward. And then Deckard was there, tackling Malcolm to the ground, followed by Bennett, by Donovan. And then Harper and 6 state police officers swarmed the property, guns drawn. Malcolm Thorne was pulled to his feet, cuffed, still screaming about his lawyers, his connections, how he'd destroy all of us. But it was over. Harper held up the recording device, her face fierce with triumph. We got everything. Threats, admission of murder, conspiracy. You're done, Thorne. 23 years I've been waiting for this. They led him away to a waiting police car, and I stood there shaking as my family surrounded me. Are you okay? Grace asked, checking me over like I might be broken. I'm fine. It's over. It's finally over. But Harper pulled me aside. Not quite over. When we arrested Thorne, we also arrested Sheriff Sterling, the mayor, 3 county commissioners, a state senator, one of the circuit court judges. The corruption goes deeper than anyone realized. How many people? 22 arrests so far this morning. More coming as we process everything your grandfather documented. Harper's expression softened. You did it, Iris. You brought down an entire network. You got justice for your grandfather, for your grandmother, for 17 families who've been waiting decades. I didn't do it alone, I said, looking at my family, at Silas and Deckard and Rowena. No, Harper agreed. You didn't. That's what makes it even better. The next few weeks were chaos. News crews descended on Meadowbrook. The story of the young ex-con who'd brought down a corrupt pharmaceutical CEO became national news, but I tried to stay focused on what mattered. Bennett stayed for his promised 2 weeks, and we shored up the barn. Replaced the rotting porch, got the well working perfectly. He taught me basic carpentry, basic maintenance, things I'd need to know to keep the farm running. Vivian and her husband Marcus came for long weekends. They restored power to the house, updated the wiring, made it safe and warm. Grace couldn't stay long, but she set up a trust fund. Money to help me get the farm operational, to hire help when I needed it, to buy equipment and seeds and everything I'd need to make this place productive again. And Donovan kept his word. He moved into the upstairs bedroom and started working the land with me. We started small, just 5 acres of potatoes and 3 of sweet corn. Hardy crops that were difficult to completely mess up. Silas came over almost every day, teaching us what he knew. Deckard was there too, helping with the heavy work, showing me how to read the soil, how to know what the plants needed. And slowly, day by day, the farm came back to life. 3 months after Malcolm Thorne's arrest, I received an email. It was from Patricia Chen, one of the prosecutors who'd handled my original case. Dear Miss Calloway, I hope this email finds you well and healing after your ordeal. I wanted to inform you that in light of recent investigations into corruption in the Seattle legal system, your case has been reviewed. The 2 witnesses who testified against you, Jennifer Walsh and Kimberly Torres, have recanted their statements. They've admitted they were coerced by certain parties who had connections to law enforcement at the time. Additionally, new evidence has come to light that supports your claims of innocence, including testimony from the convenience store owner who has confirmed you were not present during the robbery. Your conviction has been overturned and your record has been fully expunged. I know this doesn't give you back the 3 years you lost or the time you lost with your grandmother. But I wanted you to know that officially, legally, you are no longer a convicted felon. You are a free woman in every sense of the word. The state of Washington offers its deepest apologies for this miscarriage of justice. Sincerely, Patricia Chen, Senior Prosecutor. I read the email 3 times. My record was clean. Officially, on paper, I was no longer defined by the worst thing that had ever happened to me. But the strange thing was, it didn't matter as much as I thought it would. The vindication was nice. The official acknowledgement that I'd been telling the truth all along was satisfying. But I'd already proven to myself who I was. I'd proven it when I found the money and chose to find my family instead of keeping it. I'd proven it every morning I woke up before dawn to work this land. I'd proven it when I stood up to Malcolm Thorne. I'd proven it in every honest dealing, every kept promise, every moment I chose to be the person my grandmother believed I could be. That evening I told Donovan about the email. How do you feel, he asked. Grateful, I said. Not just about this, but about everything. About finding this place, about Grandma hiding those letters where I'd find them. About making the choice to find all of you. He nodded slowly. Mother used to say that the land teaches you things if you're willing to listen. Patience because you can't rush a harvest. Humility because nature doesn't care about your plans. Resilience because every season brings new challenges. What else did she say? That legacy isn't about holding on to things. It's about what you give away, what you invest in others, what you leave behind that makes the world a little better than you found it. 6 months after Malcolm Thorne's arrest, we held a celebration at the farm. All 4 of my aunts and uncles came with their families. Silas and Deckard, Rowena, Detective Harper, the families of the 17 victims, half the town. The farm looked different now. The fields were green with growing crops. The barn stood straight and strong. The house had fresh paint and new windows. We'd hired our first employee, a young man from town named Danny, and his sister Maya, who'd graduated high school and discovered she had a talent for social media marketing. She'd started an Instagram account for the farm. Photos of sunrise over the fields of the old John Deere tractor Deckard and I had fully restored of vegetables fresh from the ground. Within months, we had thousands of followers and people driving hours to visit our farm stand. As the sun set, Grace asked if she could say something. She stood on the porch and the crowd gradually quieted. 8 months ago, she began. A young woman bought this property for $100 because she had nowhere else to go. She didn't know it was her inheritance, didn't know the history, didn't know the family who'd loved and lost this land. Her voice broke slightly, and then she found 263 letters. Every one of them proof that our mother never gave up, never stopped searching, never stopped believing. Grace looked at me, tears streaming down her face. Iris, you didn't just restore a farm, you restored faith. Faith in honesty, faith in second chances, faith in the idea that doing the right thing matters even when it costs you everything. Donovan joined his sister on the porch. When I came back here 6 months ago, I was running from a life that felt empty. I'd spent years angry at our mother for keeping this farm, for not letting go, but working this land with Iris taught me something, he continued. Mother didn't choose the farm over us. She kept it because it was evidence, because it represented everything our father died fighting for, and because she believed someday someone would finish what he started. Vivian was crying now, as was Bennett. And she kept it for you, Vivian added, looking at me. So her granddaughter would have a home to come back to. I stood, my own eyes wet. I don't have a big speech, but I want to say thank you. Thank you for taking a chance on someone who showed up with nothing. Thank you for teaching me everything I know. Thank you for becoming my family. I pulled out the tin box, the one that had held the money and the journal and the letters. Inside there's one more thing, I said. Something Grandma left for whoever found all of this. I opened the box and pulled out the final letter, the one that had been sealed separately at the very bottom. I'd been saving it for this moment. I opened it with trembling hands and read aloud in the evening light. If you found this money, you've also found my secrets, my regrets, and my hopes. I don't know who you are. I don't know if you're my Iris or a stranger or someone years from now who stumbled across this old tractor. But I know something important about you. You were curious enough to look, thorough enough to search, patient enough to find what was hidden. Those are good traits, necessary traits for anyone who wants to make something of this land or of their life. This money represents years of work, of saving, of sacrifice. Use it to build something good. Use it to connect with people, to create something that matters. Don't make my mistakes. Don't hold on to things so tightly that you forget what you're holding them for. And if you can, if by some miracle my Iris is reading this, know that I never stopped looking. I never stopped writing. I never stopped believing you'd come home. Be strong, my darling girl. Be brave. Finish what your grandfather started. I believe in you. I always have. In hope and in love. Eleanor Calloway. The silence that followed was profound. Then someone started clapping. Then another person. And soon everyone was applauding, crying, celebrating a woman who'd died months ago, but whose love and faith had somehow reached across time to create something beautiful. Grace walked over and hugged me tightly. She did it. Mother did exactly what she said. She brought us all back together. That night, long after everyone had left, I walked to the Meadowbrook Cemetery. I stood in front of my grandmother's grave and carefully placed all 263 letters on the ground before it. "Grandma," I whispered. "I read them all. Every single one, 5 years of letters. You never gave up." I knelt down, touching the cold granite. I thought nobody wanted me. I thought I was completely alone. But you were looking for me the whole time, writing every week, hoping every day that I'd come home. The tears came freely now. "I'm home now, Grandma. I'm home. And I'm going to make you proud every single day, I promise." I told her about the farm, about her children coming back, about Malcolm Thorne's arrest, about Donovan staying to work the land with me, about the corn we'd planted and the potatoes that were growing strong, about how her faith in me had changed everything. "I'm not alone anymore," I said. "I have a family, I have a home, I have a purpose. And it's all because of you, because you never gave up. Because you believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself." I stayed there for a long time, talking to her in the darkness. When I finally stood to leave, I felt lighter. Like a weight I'd been carrying for years, maybe my whole life, had finally lifted. I walked back through the dark fields toward the farmhouse where lights were burning in the windows. Donovan had stayed behind, making dinner. Deckard was there too, helping to fix a door that had been sticking. My family. Not the one I'd been born into, but the one I'd found, the one I'd fought for. As I climbed the porch steps, I looked back at the land stretching out in the moonlight, the fields, the barn, the old tractor now fully restored and gleaming. This place had taken so much from so many people. My grandfather, 17 families, years of my grandmother's life. But it had also given me everything: a home, a purpose, a family, a second chance. I thought about that scared 23-year-old girl who'd walked out of Riverside Reform School with $72 and a heart full of anger. She'd been so lost, so alone, so convinced that nobody cared if she lived or died, but she'd been wrong. Someone had cared. Someone had spent 5 years searching. Someone had kept faith even when there was no reason to hope. And that faith, that stubborn, relentless, unreasonable love had saved me, had brought me home. Inside the house, I could hear Donovan and Deckard laughing about something. Could smell dinner cooking. Could see the warm light spilling out into the darkness like a welcome. I took one last look at the farm, my grandmother's gift, my grandfather's legacy, and I went inside. Because sometimes family isn't the place you come from. Sometimes it's the place you fight to keep. Sometimes it's the place where 263 unanswered letters finally find their reply. "I'm home, Grandma, and I'm never leaving again."